one officer's pride, one woman's unshakable confidence, and a moment that will change everything. Racism, power, and the line that shouldn't be crossed. What happens when an officer's hatred and pride meet an FBI agent who won't back down? Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. You don't want to miss how this story unfolds. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind that felt almost like an illusion of calm. The sun had barely started climbing into the sky, and the city streets were still sleepy, with only a few cars buzzing past on their early commutes. Officer Jason Keller, a mid-30s, stocky cop with a face hardened by years of bitterness, sat in his patrol car, watching the clock tick slowly toward 8 a.m. His shift was dragging on, and nothing had happened worth remembering until now. Keller's reputation had preceded him wherever he went in the precinct. It wasn't one built on fairness or respect. No, Jason Keller was known for one thing: his utter disdain for anyone different than him. It wasn't just about race, though that was a significant factor in his disdain. It was anyone he considered lesser in his mind. He had never been shy about voicing his opinions, especially about people of color, and especially about women. But today, something was going to happen that would test his entire worldview and in the end shatter his career. Keller's radio buzzed to life, pulling him from his thoughts. The voice on the other end was sharp, quick, and to the point. Unit 32, we've got a new operation on the south side. Possible suspect in a robbery. FBI involvement. Get there now and support. Jason sighed heavily, annoyed by the words FBI. The last thing he wanted was to deal with those federal snobs. He had heard all about them, the way they walked around like they were better than everyone else, throwing their weight around with their shiny badges. Still, orders were orders. He turned the key in the ignition, and his squad car rumbled to life, the engine growling as he pulled onto the road, cutting through the early morning fog. The assignment felt like a routine job at first, just another suspect, another FBI agent trying to take over. But Keller's mind soon wandered to the one thing that always lit a fire under him: confrontation. He could feel it in his gut that this was going to be a test of power. He was going to make sure this encounter went his way. As Keller pulled up to the scene, he saw it, a black SUV with government plates parked on the curb. The blue and red lights from several nearby police cars flickered in the distance, casting an eerie glow on the street. There were federal agents standing near the SUV, talking among themselves, their cold expressions betraying their aloof professionalism. Jason parked his car a few meters away and got out, the sound of his boots crunching on the gravel echoing in the quiet morning air. He could see her before he even got close, an FBI agent standing near the back of the SUV, arms crossed, watching him approach with an expression that screamed authority. Her name was Agent Erica Bell. She was in her late 20s, with short, neatly cropped hair, and a no-nonsense demeanor that made her stand out even among her colleagues. She was tall, confident, and a woman of color, something that Keller wasn't particularly fond of. As Keller walked toward her, he couldn't help but notice the way her dark brown eyes never wavered from his, as if daring him to make the first move. She was an FBI agent, but more than that, she was a woman in a field dominated by men, and in Keller's eyes, that made her a target. He couldn't stand the thought of someone like her coming in and trying to tell him how to do his job. When he reached her, he didn't bother with pleasantries. "Agent Bell, right?" Keller said, his voice dripping with a mix of sarcasm and arrogance. "You really think you can just waltz into our city and start taking over?" Bell looked him up and down, unfazed by his tone. "I'm here to help, officer," she replied calmly, but there was a sharp edge to her words. "I don't have time for your petty problems. We've got a case to crack." Keller's face twisted into a sneer, his fists clenching at his sides. "I don't need your help, lady. I've got this handled." He took a step closer, invading her personal space, hoping to intimidate her. Bell didn't move an inch, her posture still composed, her eyes locked onto his. "I'm not here to argue," Bell said, her voice cool but firm, "but if you keep getting in the way, you'll find yourself on the wrong side of this investigation. And believe me, you don't want that." Keller could feel his blood boiling, the nerve of this woman, standing there and threatening him like she owned the place. He was the one with the badge, the authority. He could feel his control slipping away as Bell's calmness and confidence seemed to outshine his own. "You know," Keller started, his voice low and menacing, "I don't take kindly to being told what to do by people like you." His tone hardened, and he stepped forward again. "I think it's time you learned your place." Without warning, Keller reached for his gun, his hand moving swiftly to the holster. Bell's eyes widened in a flash of recognition, but before she could react, Keller had drawn his weapon, pointing it directly at her chest. "Don't move," he barked, his voice a sharp order. "You're under arrest for obstructing justice." The words hit Belle like a slap in the face. She hadn't anticipated this level of aggression, and the moment her body reacted, ready to defend herself, her mind was already processing 1,000 calculations. She wasn't about to let him get away with this. "Put the gun down, Keller," Belle said, her voice barely above a whisper, but there was a lethal undertone beneath it. For a split second, Keller hesitated. He had crossed the line. No one ever questioned his authority. But there was something about Belle's calm composure, her unwavering defiance, that made him second-guess himself. The standoff between Officer Keller and Agent Belle seemed to stretch out in a suspended moment of raw tension. Keller's hand trembled slightly, his gun still pointed at Belle, the metal of the barrel glinting under the morning sun. His mind raced as he stared at her unflinching face, watching the way she stood there, seemingly calm but ready for anything. The silence between them was thick. Keller's thoughts were clouded with a mixture of anger and confusion. He had crossed a line, but he couldn't turn back now. There was too much pride at stake. But Belle, despite the weapon trained on her, didn't move. She didn't flinch. She was fully aware of the situation, her every muscle tensed and prepared. But her eyes, those brown, steady eyes, held the power that Keller couldn't shake. She was a woman of authority, and she had dealt with men like him before. It didn't matter that he had a gun. The world around them seemed to fade. The distant sound of traffic, the chirp of birds, even the rustle of wind in the trees. Everything seemed muted as Belle's next words cut through the silence. "You know what, Keller?" she said, her voice colder than before, but with an underlying calm strength. "You're making a huge mistake, and not just for me, but for yourself. You think this is about your authority, don't you? But you're wrong. This is about power, and you've just overplayed your hand." Keller's chest tightened as her words sank in. He had thought she would back down, that the gun would force her into submission, but she wasn't afraid. Her confidence was unnerving. How had she gotten so composed? She had to know he wasn't bluffing. "You're not in charge here, Belle," Keller sneered. His voice was a little shakier now, betraying the anxiety that was slowly building inside of him. "I am. You'll do what I say, and you'll stay out of my way. Now back off." Belle didn't flinch. Instead, she shifted slightly, and Keller, for the first time, noticed the glint of something in her hand, the same hand that had been resting at her side. It was subtle, but it was enough to make him hesitate. Her voice lowered, but it was laced with a quiet authority that made Keller's heart skip a beat. "You really don't know who you're dealing with, do you, Keller? You may have the badge, but I have the power to bring you down. And right now, you're the one about to face the consequences of your own actions." The words hit Keller like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of him. His finger twitched on the trigger, but something held him back. The weight of her stare, the steady resolve in her eyes. It was like a force field he couldn't break through. "What do you mean by that?" Keller's voice was thick, hoarse. He had never felt more exposed in his life. Belle's eyes flickered, and she leaned in slightly, her movements fluid, controlled. She didn't need to move fast. Her presence was enough to unsettle him. "I'm a federal agent, Keller. I have the jurisdiction to investigate, to hold people accountable, even people like you." Keller's throat tightened. He had heard enough of this FBI nonsense. He had heard stories of agents like her thinking they were untouchable. But this felt different. This felt real. Belle wasn't backing down, and that was what unsettled him. He had made a snap decision when he pointed the gun at her, and now it seemed as though that decision was going to come with repercussions he hadn't prepared for. Just as the weight of that thought began to sink in, Belle's eyes flickered over his shoulder, her head tilting slightly. Keller didn't have time to react before he heard the sound of sirens growing louder, coming in from the distance. His blood ran cold. Backup was on the way, but it wasn't the kind of backup he wanted. It was the kind that would expose him, tear his credibility apart, and leave him facing something far worse than just a reprimand. Belle, too, could hear the sirens, and her lips curled into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "You're out of time, Keller. You've already made your move, and now you'll pay for it." Keller's mind raced as he realized that he was no longer in control. His thoughts were spinning, his hands shaking, the weight of the gun in his palm suddenly feeling like an anchor pulling him down. The backup wasn't here to help him. They were here to clean up his mess. They were going to see the situation for what it really was. Belle took a step closer, her posture still unyielding. "Step away from the weapon, Keller. Now." For a brief moment, Keller felt a surge of defiance. He could still fight this, right? But then his radio crackled, the voice on the other end bringing a chilling reality to life. "Officer Keller, we're on our way. What's the situation?" He glanced at the radio, and then back at Belle. The truth was undeniable now. He had messed up. His finger slowly loosened its grip on the gun. Belle's eyes didn't leave his for a second. "Good choice," she said softly. The sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of the backup that was meant to make things right. But Keller knew that the cavalry would not be coming to rescue him. They were coming to see what he had done, and when they did, he would be the one in handcuffs. Keller swallowed hard, the weight of his actions now fully crushing him. He had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. As the backup unit screeched to a halt, the once quiet street was now alive with the sound of police radios and the sharp crunch of boots against the gravel. Officers flooded the area, moving quickly and efficiently, their eyes scanning the scene as they took in the situation. But as they noticed Keller, still standing frozen with his gun aimed at Agent Bell, the tension in the air thickened. The new arrivals looked between the two, their gazes flickering with confusion and concern. "Officer Keller, what's going on here?" One of the officers, a tall, muscular man named Garcia, called out as he approached. His voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of surprise as he took in the situation. Keller didn't answer immediately. His eyes were locked on Agent Bell, whose calm presence only seemed to make him feel smaller and smaller. He could feel the weight of the gun in his hand, and despite his training, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just the gun that was weighing him down. It was the moment he had created, the mess he had gotten himself into. "Stand down, Keller." Garcia's voice was more urgent now, his hand resting on the baton at his side. "What are you doing? Put the gun away." But Keller couldn't bring himself to lower the weapon. His mind was spinning, and the words seemed to stick in his throat. The sirens from earlier had now become deafening, and he could feel the eyes of the officers around him, each one questioning his actions. Belle, on the other hand, hadn't moved an inch. She was completely unfazed, her gaze still locked on Keller. Her stance had shifted, but it was only to make her more imposing. She wasn't scared. In fact, it seemed like she was almost waiting for something. Her hands remained at her sides, but her calmness now seemed to have an almost magnetic quality, drawing the attention of everyone around her. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the entire situation was teetering on the edge of an explosion. Keller was trapped in a moment where every second felt like an eternity, and with each passing heartbeat, the weight of his mistake seemed heavier. His finger twitched on the trigger, but still, he didn't pull it. Belle, sensing the hesitation, stepped forward, slowly closing the gap between them. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, yet sharp enough to cut through the mounting chaos. "Put it down, Keller," she said again, her tone devoid of anger or fear. It was pure, unyielding authority. "You don't want to do this." But Keller's mind was clouded, torn between the rising pressure of his pride and the undeniable reality of what was happening. His whole career was hanging by a thread, and all because he couldn't let go of the control he thought he had. He had made a mistake, but there was no undoing it now. His finger inched toward the trigger again. "You're not going to shoot, Keller," Belle said, her voice steady, a sharp contrast to the increasing chaos around them. "I know you're not. You're too scared." Keller's heart pounded in his chest. How did she know? His mind screamed at him to act, to take control again, but the fear was seeping into his bones. The gun, the weapon he had once held with such confidence, now felt like a liability, a dangerous silent reminder of how far he had fallen. The officers around them began to shift, moving slightly closer as they waited for orders. Some were eyeing Keller warily, but others looked toward Belle, their gazes filled with curiosity. They didn't know her, but they could tell that she wasn't someone to be messed with. She was commanding, professional, and unafraid. "Step away from the weapon," Garcia ordered again, this time his voice firmer, more demanding. The tension was suffocating, and Keller's fingers seemed to move of their own accord, tightening around the gun. But then Belle spoke again, her voice like a whip crack in the air. "You're scared, Keller. That's what this is about. You're scared that if you let go of this, you lose everything. Your power, your control. But you're wrong. You're only making things worse." Keller's breath hitched. She was right. He was scared. He had always been scared. Scared of losing his reputation, his sense of authority. But that fear had clouded his judgment and led him here, to this moment of no return. The sirens were so close now, and Keller could hear the sound of boots approaching from the other side of the street. It wouldn't be long before more officers arrived, and when they did, they would all know the truth of what had just transpired. Finally, Keller's hand began to shake uncontrollably. The grip on the gun loosened slightly, his arm trembling from the weight of his own internal conflict. The adrenaline coursing through his veins began to dull, and as his breath steadied, he realized something. He didn't have to be the one in control anymore. He could let go. He turned his head briefly, catching the eyes of his fellow officers. Garcia was still staring at him, his face a mixture of concern and disbelief. Keller's lips parted, but no words came. His heart thudded painfully against his chest, the realization of what he had done settling over him like a cold, heavy blanket. Belle took another step forward, her gaze never leaving him. She didn't need to say anything more. She was letting him make the choice, but she knew exactly what would happen next. Keller finally took a deep breath, and with great reluctance lowered the gun. His hand shook as he dropped it to his side, the weapon now harmless. But just as he did, Agent Bell took one swift, decisive step forward. Before Keller could process what was happening, he felt cold metal snap around his wrists. "You're under arrest, Officer Keller," she said, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of an irreversible decision. The sound of the handcuffs clicking into place echoed in Keller's ears, and for the first time he felt truly helpless. The cold metal around his wrists was a stark reminder of his lost power, a symbol of his irreversible mistake. His once steady hands, so used to wielding control over others, now trembled under the weight of his own actions. Agent Bell's gaze never wavered as she secured the cuffs, her movements efficient and practiced. Keller could barely meet her eyes, his pride slipping away with each second that passed. The weight of the situation was slowly sinking in. This wasn't just about a moment of bad judgment. This was the beginning of the end for him. His entire career, his future, was now in jeopardy, all because of a decision he made in the heat of the moment. "You're making a mistake, Belle," Keller muttered through gritted teeth, his voice thick with frustration. "I was just doing my job. You don't have to do this." Belle straightened, her posture impeccable, but her eyes remained hard. She wasn't moved by Keller's protests, nor did she feel any pity for him. This wasn't personal, this was about accountability. "Your job," she repeated with a sharp edge to her tone, "your job was to protect and serve, but instead you threatened a federal agent. You pointed a gun at me, and you crossed a line that should never be crossed." The words stung, and Keller recoiled slightly, his chest tightening with anger and embarrassment. He opened his mouth to argue again, but Belle didn't give him the chance. She stepped back and signaled to the other officers to approach, who had been silently observing the entire exchange. "Garcia, take him in," Belle instructed, her voice clear and no nonsense. "Make sure he's processed properly. I want a full report on this." The tall officer Garcia nodded and moved toward Keller, his hands already reaching for the now cuffed man. Keller's mind raced. He had been so sure that he could outlast the situation, but now, with his wrists bound and the reality setting in, he realized how utterly powerless he was. He let Garcia guide him toward the patrol car, his head hanging low. The embarrassment was suffocating. The officers around him didn't look at him with admiration or respect. There was no camaraderie, no understanding in their eyes. They were watching him, just like they would anyone else who had crossed the line. The disappointment was clear, and Keller couldn't escape it. Agent Bell watched as Keller was led away, her expression unchanged. She had done what needed to be done, but the weight of the moment wasn't lost on her. She had never wanted to see someone brought down, but Keller had given her no choice. The man had abused his power, and now he would face the consequences. As Garcia and Keller disappeared into the squad car, Belle turned her attention back to the remaining officers. Their gaze was a mixture of awe and confusion. Some of them were still processing what had just happened, while others were silently making their own judgments about what they had witnessed. "Let's get this scene cleared up," Belle said, her voice steady. "We've got work to do." The officers nodded and quickly began to break up, some heading back to their vehicles, while others began gathering evidence. The operation, which had started as a routine investigation, had now turned into something much larger. Keller's arrest was a story that would spread quickly, and Belle knew that soon everyone in the department would be talking about it. The gravity of what had transpired was not lost on her, but Belle didn't linger on the aftermath. There was still much to be done. She had a job to finish, and she couldn't afford to let this moment distract her. She had seen too many officers like Keller, men who thought they were above the law, men who let their power define them, but in the end they all fell, and now it was Keller's turn. Belle walked toward her SUV, her mind already shifting back to the investigation at hand. But as she opened the door and slid behind the wheel, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and saw the name flashing, Director Daniels. Her heart skipped a beat. She answered the call quickly, her voice steady but alert. "Agent Bell," came the voice on the other end. Director Daniels' tone was grave. "I've been briefed on the situation. This is bigger than we anticipated. We need to move quickly. Keller's arrest is just the beginning." Belle's grip tightened on the steering wheel as she absorbed the words. She had known this was coming. There was always more to uncover, always another layer beneath the surface. Keller's actions were just the start of something much deeper, and Belle was ready for whatever came next. "We're on it, Director," she replied, her voice firm. "I'll keep you updated." As she ended the call, Belle stared ahead, her mind working through the next steps. She had been trained for moments like this, moments when the stakes were high and the pressure intense. But this case, this operation was different. It was personal now. She wasn't just hunting a suspect, she was exposing a system, and she wouldn't stop until every last piece of the puzzle was in place. She pressed the gas pedal and drove off, her mind already focused on the next move. The city skyline loomed ahead as Agent Belle's SUV cut through the early afternoon traffic, the weight of everything she had just witnessed lingering in the air. Keller was on his way to the station, now in handcuffs, and she could feel the ripple effect of his arrest already beginning to spread throughout the department. But the story didn't end with Keller's fall. That was just the opening chapter, and Belle was determined to unravel what lay beneath. As she pulled into the parking lot of the FBI office, the atmosphere inside was a mixture of quiet efficiency and barely contained urgency. The phone calls, the reports, the requests from higher-ups, it was all starting to converge. This wasn't just about one rogue officer. This was about a system that had been operating unchecked for too long, one that had allowed men like Keller to thrive. Belle stepped out of the SUV, her posture rigid but her eyes sharp with determination. She had no time to waste. She had a lead, and she needed to follow it now before anyone else could intervene. Inside the building, Belle made her way to the war room, a large conference room filled with whiteboards, sticky notes, and digital displays showing a tangle of information. Her team was already there, working at full capacity, sorting through data, tracking down leads, and connecting the dots. Agent Belle, one of her team members, Sanchez, greeted her as she entered. He was tall, with short cropped hair, and his eyes immediately locked onto hers, recognizing the fire in her gaze. "You need to see this." Sanchez had a laptop open on the table in front of him. He quickly pulled up a series of photos, and Belle's eyes narrowed as she looked at the screen. The images were of Keller, but there was something more, a string of text messages, timestamps, and communication logs that painted a much larger picture than she had anticipated. "This is Keller's phone," Sanchez continued, his voice low, almost a whisper. "We've been able to access it, and we've found encrypted messages, phone calls, and even some direct contacts with high-level individuals in the police department." Belle leaned in closer, her gaze scanning the screen, her heart rate increasing as the implications of what she was seeing began to sink in. These weren't just idle conversations. These were calculated, deliberate actions. Keller had been more than just a rogue cop. He had been part of something far bigger, something that connected him to the very people he had sworn to protect. "Who else is involved?" Belle asked, her voice tight with urgency. Sanchez's fingers danced over the keyboard as he pulled up a list of names, officers, detectives, and even a few judges. The network was far-reaching, and it wasn't just contained within the precinct. It had been allowed to grow, fester, and operate with impunity, feeding off the very system that was supposed to bring justice. "Belle, this is a full-blown corruption ring," Sanchez said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if even saying it out loud made it more real. "And it goes way beyond Keller. He's just the tip of the iceberg." Belle's jaw clenched as she absorbed the gravity of the situation. It was worse than she had imagined. This wasn't a few bad apples. This was a well-oiled machine that had been running under the radar, manipulating the system for years. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The weight of this discovery was heavy, but Belle was used to carrying it. This was why she had joined the FBI, to dismantle corruption, to take down the system that had allowed people like Keller to thrive. And now, she was on the verge of bringing it all down. "I want everything on this ring," she said, her voice firm. "Pull every file, every phone record, every piece of evidence you can find. We're going to take them down, all of them." Her team sprang into action, typing furiously, pulling up records and making calls. Belle turned toward the large map on the wall, her mind already racing through the next steps. She had her lead, she had the evidence, and now, she just needed to stay one step ahead of everyone else who would try to cover this up. The silence in the room was only broken by the sound of keyboards clicking, the hum of the air conditioning, and the soft rustle of papers as Belle's team worked at full speed. Time was running out, and Belle knew that the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it would get. But there was no turning back now. The weight of her decision to arrest Keller had opened a door, and there was no closing it. They had to keep going. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. Belle's phone buzzed again, and she glanced down at the screen. It was a text from Director Daniels. "We've got a potential leak. Watch your back." Belle's pulse quickened, but she didn't flinch. This was what she had signed up for. This was the life of an FBI agent. She wasn't afraid. She had come this far, and she would finish what she started. Turning back to her team, she nodded. "Get me everything you've got on those names. We need to move fast." As they scrambled to compile the files, Belle's eyes flickered toward the window, her mind turning over the next steps. She had seen corruption before, but this was different. She wasn't just fighting for justice now. She was fighting for the truth, and nothing could stop her. Keller's arrest had been the beginning, but the battle was far from over. The people behind the corruption ring were powerful, and they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But Belle was ready for whatever came next. And when the dust settled, she knew it wouldn't just be Keller in handcuffs. It would be everyone who had ever enabled him, everyone who had hidden behind their badges and their positions of power, thinking they were untouchable. Belle wasn't going to stop until they were all exposed.